Michael Lee Lanning, you've written many books, and one of the more recent books is called At War with Cancer. And the title struck me because most of the books that you've written and the books I'm personally familiar with have to do with your time in Vietnam as a platoon leader and then as a company commander. And your journal entry of October 25th, 1969, it says, once you are a combat infantryman, you see many things differently. And in a separate conversation, we're going to discuss your time in Vietnam, but right now I'm wondering if the same thing is true, because this book, At War with Cancer, you wrote it after being diagnosed with, I believe, stage 4 kidney cancer, and the doctor gave you, I believe, between 6 and 18 months to survive. Do you think that statement you wrote in your journal, that once you've experienced combat as an infantry soldier, you see a lot of things differently, is the same thing true after you've been diagnosed with cancer, the way you were?
Yeah, there's many similarities. Of course, the two books were written nearly 30 years apart.
Yeah.
Once a person has seen combat, especially as an infantryman, it kind of narrows the views in some ways and broadens them in others. It narrows the views in that you see what's important and what isn't. And basically what's important is life and death. And virtually everything else is superfluous. Over the years, I left Vietnam. I was in great physical condition. And all the way up till I was about 60, which is about 13 years ago. And I went from a speed of 100 miles an hour to zero when the doctor says you have kidney cancer, you have 6 to 18 months to live.
Wow.
I don't think I directly thought at the time of the experiences of an infantryman, but it oversees everything I thought. And that was, first of all, get all the information I could. Secondly, figure out a means of combating it and then actually executing it. And then from the experience as a combat infantryman, I knew that it took a great deal of discipline and paying real attention to what I was doing. What I did was I went to Hippocrates Health Institute at West Palm Beach, Florida. I learned a raw vegan diet supplemented by wheatgrass, green juice. Sugar feeds cancer. So I read all labels. I don't eat anything that's got any sugar in it. I don't do caffeine or alcohol. And I've been alive 13 years when they gave me 6 to 18 months. My doctor, MD Anderson, the best cancer center in the world, say they don't really agree with what I'm doing, but they say, keep doing whatever you're doing. They trot me out as a prime example, and have been interviewed by the Washington Post, Texas Monthly Magazine, and other places as a success story. And I base it on discipline. I don't have sugar. I don't make exceptions. I don't eat meat. It's nothing. I'm not a PETA member or anything like that. I do it strictly for the health benefits. And I do oxygen treatments with an oxygen concentrator twice a day. I exercise, and it takes up 2 or 3 hours a day I spend fighting cancer. And that's the name of the book, At War with Cancer. You got to approach it as an enemy that you have to meet and defeat. And although I don't think I'll defeat it, at least I'm kind of holding it to an even standpoint.
Listening to you talk, I am reminded of the first volume of your Vietnam journal, where you're very focused on being a company commander. And if I remember correctly, you were given an opportunity to get a somewhat easier job, but you passed it up because you were pursuing a goal of being a company commander. Is my recollection correct there?
You are.
Yeah.
Usually in a company, you had to be a captain and an experienced captain.
Yeah.
And I was a junior first lieutenant, where I had I had 6 months of combat in the field, and I had a battalion commander that believed that experience overwhelmed rank. We had a lot of captains coming in who had no combat experience, and the battalion commander looked at my combat experience and thought it was worth it. He took a risk, and I appreciate that he did. It was one of my goals from the time I was in high school. I had a teacher who I greatly admired, who had been a company commander in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II.
Yeah.
And he had a great influence on, that sounded like the ultimate thing was to lead a company of infantrymen in combat. Once you get past a company to battalion, brigade, and all those other levels, you're really kind of an administrator above it. You're not down on the ground, boots in the mud. But as a captain, you're down there with the troops. You're fighting the battle. And it was, I was young. I was naive in a lot of ways. But it was a way that I wanted to prove to myself. And it was a way that I felt like I owed it to the country.
Yeah.
I'd always felt that the United States was doing great things. I understood the protest movements and all that, but I felt like it was an obligation. And more importantly, I looked at it in 1968 as the Vietnam War was the biggest event of my generation. And I didn't want to miss it, and I wanted to participate in it. And if I was in it, I wanted to be at the point of the spear at the very front, and you couldn't do any more than be an infantry company commander. On my jacket, I've got the combat infantryman badge, and that's a proud symbol of all of us that fought on the ground. And when we see it, we recognize, and we recognize each other as brothers. The old Shakespeare Band of Brothers thing.
Right, Band of Brothers. Well, so listening to you talk just these few minutes, I think I'm detecting sort of a goal-oriented person who has goals and then stays focused on them. In the case of the stage 4 kidney cancer, so if I caught what you were saying a few minutes ago, you didn't immediately make a connection in your mind between this fight that you were going to make against the cancer and your experience in Vietnam. But as you look back, you can see a similarity in that you. So I'm interpreting what you're saying. Let me know if I'm correct. You identified an enemy, and then began to plan the best way to attack and defeat the enemy. And of course, the rice paddies of South Vietnam are different from the life you're living 30 years later. But in that respect, there's that similarity. Identify the enemy and do everything you can to defeat it.
Well, the similarities are if you're in the field in Vietnam, you took a look at the assets you had, which was the people. You had artillery, you had gunships, you had air power, and once you identified with cancer, I had to identify what assets I had, and that was first of all to go to the best cancer institute in the world, MD Anderson in Houston. I was living in Phoenix. I moved to Texas to be able to do that.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, when I first recognized that similarity between cancer and combat was when I called that battalion commander that had given me that company in Vietnam and said, "Hey, I'm dying of cancer. I've got 6 to 18 months. His first thing he said was, "You're not going to die. I won't let you." And he was the one that got me to get into the programs that I did. So it was the circle kind of became completed.
Yeah.
A lot of it too is, I guess, almost an obsessive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, is that once I get into something, I can't stay away from it. And it's like my writings. If I don't write every day, I feel very bad about it. I don't give myself a break very often. I push myself hard, but I believe you only have a certain amount of time in this life, and any time you waste is wasted time. I want to take advantage of every minute and every breath that I have.
Yeah. Can you, take us to the moment when, the words came out of the physician's mouth. Here's the diagnosis. Did you have an inkling? Was this a complete surprise? What do you remember about just that very first moment when you got the news?
I had had a kidney removed because of cancer and had tests every 6 months. 3 years, they said at 3 years, if you're clear, we'll declare you cancer-free. Unfortunately, when I went in for my test at the 3rd year, I got a call from the doctor that says, come in, I need to see you. So I anticipated there was a problem. I had no idea of the magnitude of it. My wife and I both went in. The doctor told us, he gave us a phone number for a specific doctor that we could see that might be able to help. This was in Phoenix. Got the word. It was one of those hot days in Phoenix with over 100 degrees. We went out to the parking lot, got in the car, turned on the air conditioner, and my wife and I looked at each other and said, what did you hear? And we both came down to what they heard. We both headed home to get on our computers to find out more information. A shock, just a total almost being hit over the head with something. But within hours, we were realizing that we had to do something. If we accepted it, then I truly just had 6 to 18 months to live. So we both agreed. In fact, the co-writer of That War with Cancer is my wife, because she tells the wife's aspect of hearing this. And she told me later that I didn't know that they also gave her the phone number and address for the nearest hospice. She didn't tell me that. So it was a joint effort. And when you fight, you got to get all the assets. And if you're fortunate to have a partner that stands behind you, you're very lucky.
Right. And this is Linda, right?
That's correct.
Right. And I'm assuming it's the same Linda you continually mention in your journals.
It is, and that's very common amongst we in the military. Excuse me, if you haven't seen each other in a while, one of the first questions is, are you still with? Because between tours, there's often divorces. Yes, we've been together ever since married shortly before I graduated from college and was commissioned. And she's written several books on her own, also one about her experiences as a waiting wife while I was in Vietnam. Texas as well.
Well,
of course, master's with an English degree that greatly helps in the editing of my books as well.
Wow. So I don't want to push the similarities between the struggle in Vietnam and the struggle against cancer too far. Obviously, these are very different things, although the personality engaged in both is the same. But is there an experience in Vietnam that you had that was kind of similar in its impact to the experience of hearing the doctor say that stage 4 kidney cancer, before you got in the car and began that process? Is there any sort of similar experience that as you look back, you think, well, this particular prior experience in Vietnam maybe came in handy a few decades later?
I'm almost laughing. I think because I hadn't thought about it before, but the experience of what that doctor said was the same experience I had a couple of times in Vietnam when I thought, you're going to die, Lee. This is the end. And there is a similarity, and certainly you don't want to, and certainly you start doing the things to keep yourself from dying, and that's the fight back. I tell people all the time that ask me about cancer, and it's the same thing about Vietnam. You only get to give up once. And if you give up once and die, you don't get to give up anymore. So you've got to fight. You've got to win. You've got to win every battle. And I go back every 3 months, sometimes 6 months for tests. And I've had many operations since, including take out various cancers and that type of thing.
Wow.
In fact, 10 different procedures, 4 different major operations, including a brain tumor from it. So,
wow.
So there's lots of things, and each time it's just like combat. Things are very calm and very smooth for weeks at a time, and then suddenly everything happens. And the things change. It's not a constant thing. It's a very much of a variable course, and it's interesting. Your questions are things that really have not been brought up in other interviews that I've done about the correlation between the two, and I appreciate it because it's making me think about it as well in some aspects I don't think I thought about that were there and were very much had an impact, but I don't think I actually thought about it at the time. But I'm seeing it as we talk in this conversation. So I appreciate it.
It's a gift to hear you talk. I think this might be the last question on this theme, or maybe there will be two more. But if I understand correctly, that there is one probable direct link between your time in Vietnam and the cancer, and that is that, if I understand correctly, the VA, the Veterans Administration, has determined that the cancer you had was related to Agent Orange. Is that correct?
That is correct. Although the kidney cancer, renal cell carcinoma, is not on the list of Agent Orange. In other words, it's not as soon as you go in and get the diagnosis, the VA recognizes it. But after they saw my entire health history, including that, they did recognize it as it being Agent Orange related.
Yeah.
I have somewhat conflicting thoughts about it, about Agent Orange. I'm not against any veteran getting any benefit that he can, but I'm still not for sure that it's conclusive that Agent Orange has caused as much damage as it's claimed. There certainly was a lot of things. I tell you what, at 22 years old, I really wasn't concerned about dying of Agent Orange related cancer in my 70s. I was much more concerned about living to be 23.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have any regrets about it. I don't have any animosities or bad feelings about the Agent Orange being used, if in fact it is the factor. I mean, that's something that happened a long time ago. I'm very appreciative that the VA has taken care of some of the problems, and of course, as being a military retiree, I have the medical benefits that help me at MD Anderson.
And for all of the problems, you hear a lot of vets bring Agent Orange up, and it's always linked to various physical problems. I'm guessing though that at the time when you're in country, and veterans don't know, what's coming in future decades. You're just on the ground dealing with what's in front of you day to day. I'm guessing that at the time, Agent Orange probably seemed like a pretty good thing, huh? Because it gives the enemy a lot fewer places to hide behind. Does that make any sense? Or
it was really in the jungles, in the deep jungles. Of course, it wasn't there when we were exposed to the Agent Orange. When we came into the fire bases, when we traveled along some of the highways there, pretty well anybody in country was exposed, and probably a lot of people in the rear areas had more exposure to Agent Orange than we in the field did, because out in the jungles and the rice paddies, of course, it wasn't used. So but we were in a lot of areas where the defoliants had been used, and we were aware. I don't remember for sure if we knew it was called Agent Orange. We knew the words defoliants as well. And of course, Agent Orange, there's also an Agent Blue and Agent Purple, several others, mixtures of dioxins that they use. But from my understanding, the people that flew the airplanes that delivered Agent Orange and around it every day have no more cancers than anybody else. So it's debatable, but like I said, there's so many veterans suffering from so many things that definitely we deserve to benefit.
Yeah. Well, so here's the last question, and we'll end this particular conversation with this one, and that is just what word would you have for? Let's just imagine somebody in a hospital or in some other context who's recently gotten the news of a diagnosis of cancer, what is your counsel to that person?
The first thing they have to do is make up their mind that they want to live. If they're going to live or give up. And if they're going to give up, that's fine. If they don't want to fight it and go through all the bad parts, the operations, all the stuff, the treatments, the chemo and all that, then that's fine. I think that's probably very good if a person decides they'd rather accept death than accept the consequences of living. I cannot say, of course, for sure, and neither will the place I went to, say that a raw vegan diet, no sugar, oxygen increase will beat cancer. It won't beat it, but it'll fight hell out of it, and it'll keep you alive while other things are found. When I was diagnosed, there's been several developments that's come along that have saved my life that did not exist when I was first diagnosed. I mentioned the brain tumor. They used a laser knife to go in. They did not have to cut. They put my head in a halo, put me in a CAT scan machine, and were able to do it with a laser and burn out the tumor with no damage to me. So that didn't exist when I was first diagnosed. The meds that I'm on now are a immunotherapy drug that a doctor at MD Anderson got has received high honors for inventing, and that didn't exist till a couple of years ago. Cancer is a very smart, wise, evil enemy. If you fight it and beat it at one place, it'll kind of pull back and go to another place or form in another way. I got it. We beat it in one of my lungs by removing the lung, and it moved to the other one.
Kind of reminds me of the Viet Cong.
Oh yeah. I guess cancer is pretty much of a guerrilla force. You can't fight it straight on. It kind of comes around. And my advice is like I said, get all the information, go to the best facilities possible, and that's Sloan Kettering in New York or MD Anderson in Houston. If you may like your local doctor and think he's wonderful, but he sees one cancer patient a week, while at MD Anderson they see 100 a day or more. Get the best care and make up your mind. If you give up, your mind and body will know you give up, and you will not be around long. I wanted to stay because I had, when I was diagnosed, a granddaughter who was 5 years old, whose father was no longer around. She had no male figure that she had ever known but me, and I wanted to be alive. In fact, my latest book is called Dear Aliana, an old soldier's last letter to his granddaughter, and that was one of the big factors.
I saw that title. Yeah, and did you write that title at a moment when you thought, well, I mean, maybe I guess this is it?
No, I guess you could say my book writing, although I've written 27 of them.
Yeah.
Basically 4 of them, or 5 if you include the cancer book. The first 2 about the Vietnam experience were written as one book, was divided at 2 when it got to the publishers. I wrote a second book about the post-Vietnam Army called The Battles of Peace, which was about the commander in Germany. And then I kind of brought all this together with cancer, knowing that I was dying, and I'm not gone yet and not intending to go anywhere, but the advice I wanted to leave my granddaughter. And I think that's, I say every grandparent should write it, every grandchild should read it, is all of us should leave a word behind with our advice on life, experiences. Tell them where your grandmother got her name from, what your great grandfather did for a living, and and I try to include in the book what I really believe and what I really think. And some of those things are probably not flattering to me, but they're the truth. And I would like my granddaughter to, she's read it, and to be able to give it to her grandchildren and say, this is what your great-grandfather, this is what he thought. I talk about Vietnam, I talk about writing, I talk about subjects from abortion to Zen. It's made is where it goes. Politics, the things that she'll know what I thought about. And like I said, some of the things are not all that flattering. They were difficult to include it. But if it was going to be effective, it had to be the truth. And that's what I thought in writing my Vietnam books. So many times I would stop and I could write something that really sounded good, made me look good, made everything look good and everything happy, but not necessarily what wasn't the truth. So I'd go back and try to write the truth down. I don't believe that any memoir at all, and that's what my first two or several of my books are, can be effective without total honesty from the author. And you can read them, and when you're reading one, within the first chapter or two, can tell just how truthful I think the person is.
Yeah. Well, Lee, I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us. In a separate conversation, we'll focus on your time in Vietnam. Thank you very much for this conversation.
You're very welcome. Thank you.